My name is Kim Rubenstein, and as the convener of the ANU Gender Institute, I was absolutely delighted to be approached by AusAid to facilitate this public lecture by Ms Bachelet. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay our respects to their elders past and present. I must say, when we launched the ANU Gender Institute with Her Excellency the Governor-General Quentin Bryce in March of 2011, we thought we were doing very well in needing to have an overflow area of the Law Lecture Theatre with screens to facilitate the numbers of people who wanted to attend. But today is testament for another ANU Gender Institute event in terms of the numbers of people who are drawn to hear our guest speaker. And it is testament to you, Ms Bachelet, in terms of the recognition around the world for your wonderful achievements in your own country, but of course now in your role as head of UN Women. I think it is particularly apposite that the ANU Gender Institute was approached by AusAid because there are similarities about the mission and perspective of the ANU Gender Institute with UN Women. The ANU Gender Institute was set up to facilitate the drawing together of all of the researchers around ANU whose work in some way touches on gender. And I encourage you to go and have a look at our website. You have a leaflet in your bag there directing you to it, to see over 120 individuals around the university whose work is developing the important outputs on questions to do with gender around a whole area of disciplines and what we have called nodes. And so in a similar fashion to UN Women, in terms of bringing together all of the different parts of the UN whose concern was touching on gender, so too have we here at ANU. And secondly, and importantly, and in a way unique to the ANU, the Gender Institute is not only about looking outward, but also looking inward, looking at ANU as an institution and the way in which gender plays out, both in its bureaucratic frameworks, but also in terms of the life experience of women at the ANU in relation to our position as staff, as academics, as teachers. And this inward focus is very important for all of us, wherever we work, to be constantly thinking about the way gender plays out in our lives, both our working lives and the relationship between our working lives and our personal lives. And to that end, UN Women, of course, is so fundamental in enlivening that. But on the spirit of ANU's development, I'm really delighted to introduce our first female Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Marnie Hughes-Warrington, to say a few words.
Perhaps I'll just have to crouch down. Thank you very much, Professor Rubenstein. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. And it is indeed a great honour for ANU to host a visit from one of the most important women on the international stage, Ms Ms Bachelet, this morning. It's a particular honour for me. Somebody told me this morning that I was the first Deputy Vice-Chancellor, female Deputy Vice-Chancellor appointed, and I went, oh yeah, that's great news, isn't it? I'm going to have a great day all day today. It's hard not to be humbled, though, by a brief look at what Ms Bachelet has achieved, and importantly, the way she's achieved it in her career and her life. Along with her mother and her father, she was imprisoned and tortured at the hands of the Pinochet regime, torture that resulted in her father's death. Asked later if she could forgive, if her nation could forgive such atrocities and move forward, she did not hesitate to say yes, and that they must. But in order to do so, they must have justice. They must know the truth of what happened to the people. She said, "My mother feeling is to learn from our experiences. The only way we build the future is not forgetting the past." Ms Bachelet's story is one of an extraordinary generosity of spirit, of drive, and of achievement. The kind of story that inspires and drives anyone who wants to make a difference in the world. In our own small way, we support Ms Bachelet's vision of empowering women and working towards gender equality at ANU with the growing Gender Institute. Established in 2011, it gives a cross-campus focus for existing research on issues of gender and sexuality, as well as to act as a catalyst to develop and deepen those activities. The Institute brings together all gender-related work being done across campus in a staggering array of areas, from gender and population to gender, law and human rights, to gender, business and economics, all areas about which our guest speaker, I'm sure, will have much to share. But before we get to Ms Bachelet, please join me in welcoming James Gilling, the first Assistant Director, General AusAid, to say a few words. Thank you, James.
Thank you very much. And I have to be frank with you, I'm not the first male head for my division in AusAid. Distinguished guests, let me also start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today. I'd also like to thank all of you for coming and for packing out this great auditorium, and also to the Gender Institute at the ANU. I hope you're all aware that we're living in very momentous times for the Australian aid program. We're one of only 2 bilateral programs across the world that is still growing today. 9 years ago, our budget was a little bit less than 2 billion Australian dollars. Today, this budget year, our budget is 5.2 billion, and by 15-16, we expect to be up around 7.3, 7.5 billion. This is a very major growth. Last year, the Australian government announced a new aid policy, and it was called Making a Real Difference, Delivering Real Results. It had a very specific purpose that was a little bit of a change from before, and that purpose is to help people overcome poverty. Before, we had talked about reducing poverty, and the implication was we worked with poor countries. But the team who looked at this objective thought very carefully about whether that was correct and decided to focus very squarely on people. And what that means is that we have to focus on the people who are poor in this world, and we have to focus on why they're poor. And it's in that equation that estimates suggest that anything up to 7 out of 10 of the world's poorest 1.3 billion people, those are the people who live on $1.25 a day, which is basically the limit that people have identified as being when every waking hour is a struggle to survive. 1.3 billion, and anything up to 7 out of 10 are women. And that is the reason why the Australian aid program has such a strong focus on issues around women in the aid program. Another issue is that wherever you look in development, women are part of the answer. Whether it's stronger and fairer growth, whether it's better governance, whether it's more lives saved, effective aid, which is what we are obliged to deliver, effective aid demands that we get better at addressing the challenges and opportunities of women. Recognition of this reality is at the heart of why so much of Australia's aid program is focused on women. In particular, it's behind why we have this big ambition in education. We aspire to be the world's largest donor to education by 2015. And the reason for that, as we all know, is because the best way to help women out of poverty is to educate girls. So, despite this acknowledgement, despite this financial commitment, despite this policy commitment to address women and gender issues, we can't make a difference on our own. The Australian nation, the Australian aid program cannot work alone. We need to identify and support people and organizations who share this view about the importance of women in reducing poverty. Many of the partners that we have who share this view are in the audience today. NGOs, members of society who help us with our advocacy work. But of course, it's also why we have such a strong relationship with UN Women. And that's why, for me, it's such a great honor to welcome the key speaker, Ms Bachelet, the Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. Ms Bachelet has been a medical doctor. She served as Chile's Minister for Health and Defense. I'm sure that's not a joint portfolio. If it is, it's another first for you. And was Chile's first female president. In 2010, Ms Bachelet took over the challenge of promoting women's rights as the first head of UN Women. And under her leadership, UN Women has established itself as a key actor in promoting gender equality around the world. And the high regard in which Australia holds Ms Bachelet's achievements was made very clear on Wednesday when she was awarded Australia's highest honour, an honorary companion of the Order of Australia. The award recognised Ms Bachelet's outstanding global leadership in the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women, as well as her eminent service to Australia-Chile bilateral relations. I'm now very pleased to invite Ms Bachelet to speak to us on how UN Women is working to make gender equality a lived reality for all women. Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished guests, friends, dear friends. Thank you very much. I would like, of course, also to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting today and to pay respect to the elders of the present and the past. And I'm really honored to be again here in Canberra, but for my first time here at the university, and to be hosted by two forward-looking institutions, AUSAID and the Gender Institute of the Australian National University. Because, as it was said before, both organizations promote equal rights and equal opportunities. I'm really grateful for your hospitality and the hospitality of the government and the people of Australia. During this, my present visit to this impressive country, I have met with officials, members of parliament, civil society, and I'm just coming from a women's shelter where I had the possibility to talk to women victims of violence, but also to a lot of fantastic women who are working to support and to try to support these women to rebuild their lives. And I really want to congratulate Australia for being a leader for women and equality. And I also want to thank Australia for its strong support to UN Women and look forward to further our collaboration. But I'm very happy here to be today at the Australian National University, and I'm proud to bring you the greetings and goodwill of my colleagues worldwide at UN Women. As you have heard, we are the newest UN agency. And UN Women was created in 2010, but we really started our real life the 1st of January 2011. And our objective is to advance gender equality and women's empowerment. It took 5 years, member states of the General Assembly of the United Nations, to discuss what was the necessary structure needed to advance, because when we would see the Millennium Development Goals, the Millennium Development Goals 3, that is empowerment of women, or the Millennium Development 4, maternal mortality, were the ones who had advanced the least. And it was clear that the structure that at the time the UN had to deal with women's rights was not enough. There were very good people, very good experience, but they were fragmented, and the gender aspects were not considered in the whole system. So it was established with support from women's group, who did a wonderful advocacy for many times to create such an organization, and of course member states. And with high hopes for greater progress for women and girls the world over. And today, UN Women has presence in over 75 countries, and we're working with partners, including Australia, on several key priorities. We're working together to advance women's political leadership and equal economic participation, because we can no longer afford to leave women out. Unleashing women's potential in the economy and politics will foster healthier society, a more inclusive economic growth and recovery, a more inclusive societies. We're working together to end violence against women and girls. And this violence is not something that is not inevitable. We all have to say no to an impunity and stand up for zero tolerance. We're working together to fully engage women in peace talks and peace building. There can be no peace or security when women are denied a seat at the peace table and suffer sexual violence. Women's voices need to be heard to build peace, that it will be lasting but also sustainable. And we're working to promote planning and budgeting for gender equality. And we do so because policies and programs should equally benefit males and females, and solid budgets need to back them. So we work in many things. We work in all areas in terms of advocacy, in all women's rights. But at the end, what we are working together for is to deliver on a promise written by the founders of the United Nations in the UN Charter, the promise of the equal rights of men and women. I'm honored to be the first leader of UN Women, and I applaud every individual, government and organization working for women's empowerment and equality. And it is my firm belief that equality is fundamental to human freedom, justice, peace, and democracy. And part of these beliefs is rooted in my own experience. I have lived through dictatorship and the abuse of power in my home country of Chile. And these were difficult times for so many Chileans, and many Chilean families like us who lost a loved one or were persecuted or exiled. And many found here in Australia a caring place, a shelter that will permit them rebuild their lives. In 1975, I came here with my mother to Australia. And we were the first, I was told at the time, the first political exile. They gave us a status of political exile. And we were working with open arms. And I really thank that, and I'm very grateful for that. So coming to Australia is not just a place where I come to make advocacy for women's rights. It's a place that is in my heart, that is in my experience, and that I know the solidarity and the goodwill of Australian people with people who have had violations of their human rights. When afterwards, because of other reasons, I went to live to Germany, and when I returned home from exile, I finished my medical degree and worked for years as a pediatrician. And I can tell you that the principle of do no harm applies just as much to the responsibility of political leadership as it does to the discipline of medicine. The principle of inclusiveness, justice, and equality underpin a healthy society. And during the past century, we saw an expansion of women's legal rights and entitlements. 100 years ago, only 3 countries allowed women to vote, and Australia was one of those. Today, that right is virtually universal. Many women came before us and paved the way. And today I want to pay tribute to one of them. Her name is Henrietta Dugdale, and in 1852 she took up residence here in Australia. Henrietta made all her own clothes, grew her own vegetables, but also was adept in carpentry. But she was also an excellent chess player. Henrietta believed in birth control, fought for women's equal social and legal status, and for women's rights to participate fully in politics. Thanks to Henrietta and her friends, the first women in the world granted the right to run for parliament were South Australian women in 1895. And today, so many years later, in every region of the world, the struggle for equality continues. From Australia to Afghanistan, from Malaysia to Mexico, from Tunisia to Tanzania, in every country, women, men, and young people continue to stand up for freedom, equality, and democracy. And we can all take pride in the barriers that were broken at the Summer Games in London, even though we still need to fix a lot of things in terms of gender equality. For the first time in the history of the Olympics, women competed from every participating nation and in every sports category. All 204 competing nations had women on their teams. This is a new world record. And I would like also to note that the majority of medals won by Australia, 20 out of 35, were won by women. I'm trying to convince if somebody doesn't believe here, then gender equality is need. And it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. The world of sport is an important and inspiring part of our wider world. I'm proud to announce that UN Women is joining forces with the International Olympic Committee to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. And women all over the world deserve a level playing field. And let me say this, equality is not something that UN Women or any institution can achieve alone, just as our friend from IUSA mentioned. The kind of challenges we have, they're so big we cannot do it all by ourselves. Equality depends on each and all of us, from the government that changes its laws, to the companies that advance equal pay and equal opportunity, to the mother and father who teach their daughter and son that all human beings should be treated equally, to the students who speak out and demand change. We are all part of the solution. And today I will talk about the 3 priorities that we have set for this year: expanding women's political participation and leadership, advancing women's economic empowerment, and ending violence against women and girls. Because we believe that in order to really achieve gender equality, it's essential that we can advance much more on women's empowerment. All of us deserve the same fair chance to contribute to our societies and live up to our potential. When everyone can contribute on an equal footing, our communities and nations are healthier and stronger. Yet, there's so many differences. And many times, I think people is not even aware of the even legal difference that in some countries exist. The World Bank made a study in more than 100 countries. And when they found this in more than 100 countries, continue to impose legal differences between men and women in areas such as women's ability to sign a contract, or to travel abroad, or to manage property, and interact with public authorities or the private sector. And when the women get married, it's even worse. And in many countries, women still have, and it's not that I'm promoting no marriage, I'm just mentioning the facts. You'll make your own decisions. In many countries, women still have unequal rights to land and to inheritance. And this is very dramatic. If you look at if you look at the worldwide, the female participation in agriculture force is probably 46%. Because in some parts of the world, like Latin America and some Asian countries, women are more male working on agriculture. But in Africa in particular, and in many places where men had gone to other places or were killed in conflict or died because of HIV/AIDS, there's women working on the agriculture. In some countries, this rate can be 80%, 60, 70, 80%. But when you see those women, only 2% have land rights. So there's so unequal possibilities for women. Or we can mention that of the 700 million illiterate adults in our world, nearly 2 in 3 are women. And you just heard that of 10, 7 poor of the world, 7 are women. All over the world, women continue to earn less than men for the same work and to do most of the unpaid work, as we say, the 3 C's: cooking, cleaning, and childcare. Every 90 seconds, a woman dies in pregnancy or due to complications from childbirth, even though we do have the knowledge and skills for safe delivery. And 1 in 3 women will experience domestic or sexual violence in her lifetime here in Australia and around the world, with surveys showing that such violence affects up to 2 in 3 women in some of the Pacific Island nations. Here in Australia, the National Council to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children estimates that such violence costs the nation about 13.6 billion Australian dollars each year. And of course, this is a high price to pay, but the truth is that we cannot put a real price on the suffering of women and children and the impact that this violence has on future generations. And all over the world, the first steps has been taken. The silence that for so many years allowed these crimes to continue is being broken. And today, more than 125 countries have specific laws that penalize domestic violence. And I have to say, it's a remarkable gain from just a decade ago. So it's okay, we have 125 countries, but there's still 600 million women living in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. And also another thing is if those laws are implemented or not. That's another thing. Studies show, on the other hand, that countries that do have strong laws have lower rates of violence against women. Moreover, the United Nations Security Council now recognizes sexual violence as a deliberate tactic of war. And advances in international law have, for the first time, made it possible to prosecute crimes of sexual violence committed during and after conflict. Because in many of those countries, unfortunately, violence does not stop with the peace agreements. Violence against women continues, a reality for many of those women, even if it is in a post-conflict situation. Today, women and men and young people around the world, and here in Australia as well, are coming together to promote zero tolerance for violence against women and girls. And we have been working with the Australian government as one of the most important funders. For example, in Fiji, with the communities where village committees have been reporting violence to the police, telling everyone that no form of violence or abuse will be tolerated. And I hope this is not only, it's also meaning that men's behavior is changing. And this is a process that is increasing. It started last year with 15 communities, and this year, additional 15 community committees have been working on this campaign. And here in the Pacific and in all regions, UN Women is proud to support efforts to end impunity, to provide justice and vital services to survivors, and to prevent and end violence against women and girls. Well, the agenda to secure gender equality and women's rights is a challenge for every country, rich and poor, north and south. And it's something I have fought for my whole life. As a young mother and pediatrician, I experienced the struggles of, well, I should say, even as a minister, I experienced the struggle of balancing family and career, and saw how the absence of childcare prevented women from paid employment. I said as minister because I always tell this anecdote, because I am a single mother, I have 3 kids, I was Minister of Health, and every day I had to wake up, prepare, of course, the breakfast for the kids, wake them up, help them when they were little, etc., take them to school. And then when I went into the office, I have been already like 3 hours working. And my undersecretary, he was a man, and he will come fresh. He had had breakfast in bed. He has been driving home to the office, etc. And we used to joke about it. So nobody has to tell me the struggles between family and career. Well, the opportunity to help remove these barriers is one of the things that politics brings to people. And I decided to get involved in politics because I just couldn't stand injustice and inequality. And I want to make, and I did want to make my contribution to this cause. And when I had the chance to be in decision-making position, I decided that it was so important to ensure social protection, to support policies that extended health and childcare services to families, to prioritize public spending for social protection, such as pensions for the elderly, and many other things. And of course, as president of my republic, I worked hard to create equal opportunities for both men and women so they could contribute their talents and experiences to the challenging facing our country. I mean, during being Minister of Health, I worked in the reform of the health system, where I also created the Commission for Equal Opportunities and Equal Rights for Health. But being a Minister of Defense also, I worked very strong so women could have equal opportunities and, of course, an adequate work environment so they can really could also fulfill their dreams. But when I being a president and having learned, and it was mentioned that I had 2 portfolios, health and defense. They were not together, they were consecutive. I would have never been President of the Republic if I would have never been Minister of Defense. Because as Minister of Health, I was a caregiver. What can be more feminine than caregiver? And it doesn't seem linked to power. And people believe that some authorities need to be linked to power issues. The 2 prime candidates in my coalition was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and me, the Minister of Defense, both females. It was the first time in Chile's history that there were 2 women in traditional male-dominated areas. That's why when I became President of the Republic, and knowing that there were so wonderful women as wonderful men in my country, I decided that one of the problems that women usually have is that they're invisible to many others. So I decided to appoint 50% women and 50% men, not only in the cabinet of ministers, but also all around the government. In everywhere, women should be 50 and 50. Because we needed to ensure that really capable women, fantastic women, have the opportunity to be in charge of very important responsibilities. And I'm so convinced that governments must lead by example. And that's why I don't believe it's easy for women itself. I think it's so much obstacles for women that if we really want to achieve gender equality and women's rights, we need to take affirmative action. So that's why I'm a strong advocate for special temporary measures, such as quotas or others, parity law, any kind of measure that could really level the playing field. So we could increase women's presence in parliament or in corporate board. And I have to say, I'm always amazed of this artificial discussion when you speak about quotas. Because everybody then starts saying, oh no, we need people with merits. But who asks themselves if men have merits when they're on board? So why they think of merit is only about female? So I really believe, and the experience of Norway, I have to say, 6 years since they installed 40% on boards and companies, it has been a great success. And companies that have 40% of more women on their board outperform much better than the ones who don't have. So it's not, the evidence shows that it's a good thing to advance on gender equality. And I applaud Australia's commitment to a minimum 40% representation of women and men on Australian government boards. During these times of economic crisis, social upheaval, and political transformation, we can no longer afford to leave women out. Last September, UN Women brought together women leaders at the United Nations to call for increased women political participation on decision-making. And that led that in December of last year, the nations of the world agreed to take concrete and proactive measures to advance women's participation and leadership in politics. I truly believe that a society that is a form of men and women, at least 50-50, in some societies even more than 50. So it's amazing that in many texts and resolutions we read something like minorities, women and children, when in some places it's more than 50%. But the thing is that I'm so convinced that when more women are leaders, what we are trying to do then is to reflect and represent the diversity of a society, so decisions better respond to the diverse needs of the society. And I have learned, there is an old French saying that when one woman goes into politics, she changes. But when many women are leaders and go into politics, it's politics and policies that change. And I think that in this current situation, when we see so much, if I would say, disappointment on how the world is evolving, and so many young people feeling they don't like the world they live in, I think the possibility of, in politics, have women and men and young people really will be part of the solution to have politics being, I would say, representing really the needs of the people. From Sri Lanka to Costa Rica, from Rwanda to Spain, where quotas has been used to boost the number of women legislators, progressive laws have been passed to secure land rights, to tackle violence against women, and to improve health care, reproductive rights, and employment. Where women have organized sometimes across party lines to ensure women's interests are represented, change has followed. The bottom line is that women's voices need to be heard. We need more women in decision-making positions. And this is especially important for decisions that have a major impact on women's lives, such as sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, which are fundamental to gender equality and women's empowerment. And I think that once we have equal representation of women and men in Parliament, we will hopefully not need to explain anymore that the spirit and body of women cannot be divided, and that if they can vote for or be elected to the highest office, women should also be able to decide if, when, and how many children they want to have. And women themselves know best what they need and deserve. And today, women make up less than 10% of world leaders and less than 1 in 5 members of parliament. The 30% critical mass mark for women's representation in Beijing in parliament has been reached or exceeded by only 32 countries. And we know that here in the Pacific, with the exception of Australia and New Zealand, the representation of women in parliament has the dubious distinction of being the lowest of the world, at only 3.5 compared to 20% worldwide. Moreover, the majority of the parliaments in the world without any women at all, or only 1 woman, are here in the Pacific region. But the good news is that things are changing. 3 female candidates were recently elected to join the 9th Parliament of Papua New Guinea. The last woman, Julie Soso, is the first woman ever to be elected to Parliament from the country's highlands region, an area known for its big man politics. She's only the 7th woman ever to be elected to the Parliament in Papua New Guinea. And women were supported by a campaign called Know Your Women Candidate that was launched in the country for this year's national elections. The campaign is the first of its kind in Papua New Guinea and was spearheaded by the National Council of Women with support from UN Women and, of course, with funds from Australia and other partners. And this generated a lot of interest in the country. And we saw increased political support to women's candidates like never before. The bill to bring the 22 reserved seats for women into parliament in PNG is still pending, and we look forward to continued momentum. Progress is also underway in Samoa, where the Prime Minister last year proposed a 10% quota to be introduced for the next elections. And steps are being taken in Vanuatu to include 30% representation of women at the municipal and provincial councils and national parliament by 2015. Overall, the issue of reserving seats, I know it's widely debated here in the Pacific. And what we are doing in UN Women is provide support to countries, to organizations, to candidates, to political parties, to voters, electoral commissions, and legislative efforts to ensure that more women vote, but also more women get elected. And having more women leaders will accelerate progress for peace, equality, and democracy. But another priority is advancing women's economic status. Today, more than half of working women worldwide are in vulnerable jobs. Gender wage gaps are still large, and balancing work and family remains a daily struggle. By strengthening women's economic role, economic recovery can be faster, fairer, and more sustainable. And studies show that women are more likely than men to put their income back into their communities, driving hunger, illiteracy, and mortality rates down, and expanding economic growth. And there is a strong economic case for achieving gender equality. We heard that Australia will give a lot of importance on girl education, and that's really important. It will permit also that women can have better jobs, better salaries, but more than that, we know, and as a pediatrician I know, and there's studies of the World Bank in the Latin American and the Caribbean region, that the most important factor on the future of a child to be able to achieve a different possibility, a better possibility, is the mother's education. And we also know if we can achieve that girls stay at school the longer the possible, the rates of early forced marriage, early child pregnancy, HIV/AIDS, maternal mortality drop dramatically. So even though we do not provide services of education, we will be also making advocacy for policies that permit that more girls can have a higher level of education. But going back to the strong economic case for achieving gender equality, it's estimated that closing the gap between women and men's workforce participation could boost Australia's gross domestic product by up to 13%. And probably you have read that the World Economic Forum reports that greater gender equality correlates positively with per capita gross national products. Countries with greater equality with men and women have also, I mean, they're not all only more equal, healthier society, but also have economies that are more competitive and grow faster. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, finds that if we give women farmers the same assets, not bigger than that, the same as men, to, for example, access to seed, to fertilizers, access to water, etc., it could raise national yields by up to 4%. And you could say, what is that important? Well, the important thing that it could reduce the number of hungry people by 100 to 100 million people. And a UN study finds that removing the barriers that women have to confront to really have full economic participation here in this region could boost the Asia-Pacific economy by up to $89 billion a year. So there's so many reasons and so many data that makes us consider and work in supporting countries to remove barriers that limit women's economic participation, from providing training and skills to making laws, policies, and conditions fair for women. We are working with the UN FAO, the International Fund of Agricultural Development, and the World Food Programme on UN Women to support rural women. They produce nearly half of the food in developing countries, and their empowerment is necessary in and of itself and also for global food security. And we are reaching out also the private sector. In fact, I'm leaving in the afternoon and going to Sydney, where I will attend a special meeting on the women's empowerment principles. So far, more than 400 companies worldwide, big companies, have embraced these principles, that the goal is to advance equal opportunities and equal pay and women's leadership inside the companies. And I'm sure that more forward-looking companies here in Australia will soon join us. And I commend Australia for its achievements to promote equal opportunities so that women and men can make their own choices about their participation in the economy, society, and at home. From the paid parental scheme to dad and partner pay so that paid work and housework is shared, to family payment targeted to those most in need, to quality child care that is affordable and accessible, to a pay equity decision this year, to pension reform, to the Australian National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security that was launched this year, Australia is taking real concrete steps for equality between men and women. And just last month, I had the pleasure to attend the launch of a new documentary film, Side by Side, on women, peace and security. The film was produced by the Australian Government Civil Military Centre in partnership with us, with UN Women. And what is the focus? The focus of that work is afterwards to train pre-deploy peacekeepers in how we can better do to protect women's rights in conflict zones and promote their participation in peace processes. The film and its educational materials help educate the military, the police, and civilians on the complex issues they face when they deploy on peace missions in the Asia-Pacific region and around the world. Because today, the majority of victims of armed conflict, some 90%, are women and children. Yet the percentage of women at peace tables or in the police and military component of peace missions remains in the single digits. Historically, more than half of peace agreements fail within 5 years. And this record could be improved by bringing more women into peace talk and peace building. UN Women is proud of our partnership with Australia and other countries worldwide to make sure that women's voices are heard and justice is secure for women and men during and after conflict. And today there is a greater understanding than ever before that women's empowerment and gender equality are not only goals in their own right. There are goals in their own right, but not only goals in their own right. They're also critical means to an end, peace and progress that is just and sustainable. And this is so important here in the Pacific, where the vision of sustainability is threatened by climate change, drought, and rising sea levels. And that is why UN Women is supporting efforts here for women, climate change, and disaster risk reduction. Whether we're talking about climate change or peace and security, or economic growth or justice and democracy, there is one fact that is undeniable. We will stand a better chance finding solution if we fully tap into the wisdom, knowledge, and leadership of the entire population. So now is the time for women's equal rights, opportunity, and leadership. Now is the time for real equality between men and women. I thank you for your strong support for UN Women. I thank the government and the people of Australia. Thank you very much.
My name is Megan Cooper. I'm from the Australian Council for International Development. I wanted to ask a question about UN Women's enhanced coordination mandate. That was a really distinguishing factor in the founding of UN Women for the UN system. And I wanted to ask at this point in time, Madam Bachelet, if you could speak about some of the challenges, lessons learned in implementing and realizing that coordination mandate, but also what you see as some of the most important next steps in realizing that mandate. Thank you.
Hi, Ms Bachelet. My name is Chantel. I'm part of the team of UN Women Australia. Nice to see you again. Ms Bachelet, as a woman who is passionate about working as part of an organisation that promotes and seeks to achieve gender equality, what advice could you give us about what has kept you inspired throughout your journey?
Thank you very much. Yes, UN Women is an organisation that has, as I mentioned before when I start speaking, this is a new organization, but in our founding resolution, it clearly states that we won't replace the rest of the UN system that have been doing things for women all this time. And on the contrary, we're supposed to be a catalyst force that produces more results in the whole system. And we do that through different areas, but one of that is essential clearly is coordination. And I don't know if you have had the experience of have to coordinate with others. It's probably one of the most difficult things. But particularly when you have to coordinate with other agencies that have other mandates. So how to find this common platform? But we have done it through different instruments that the UN has. One is called the UNDG, that is the coordination of all the agencies and all the system of the UN system that works at the field. And the other is called, it's a name that it looks very strange, it's IANGWE. It's Interagency Network for Women's Empowerment and Women's Rights and Women's Empowerment. No, for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. That's the IANGWE. So what we do, it's 50 different organizations of the UN sit together, define priorities, but we did not want it, but we needed concrete things because it's not only about coordination, because you can coordinate, but how do you make everyone to be accountable, to feel that it's their own responsibility? And we are supposed in our mandate to lead and promote and coordinate accountability in the whole system. Because what we really need is to create synergies and be more impactful and relevant in women's life. If we're speaking on UNICEF, they work with children, but also with the mothers. If we're talking of UNAIDS, they work with women living with HIV or AIDS. If we're talking about education, girl education, if we're talking about maternal mortality or any kind of women disease, etc., we need to create a synergy, and we need to work not in a fragmented way, but in a way of, I would say, scale up our initiative, but also have a major impact. So I would say this has been a very interesting experience. I know when we say interesting sounds terrible, and sometimes it is really interesting, but I have to say it has been very successful. Because for the first time, and in a record time for the UN, in 8 months, we put together 50 organizations, and we got into what it's called, because you know the UN, they love the acronym, the so-called SWAP, System-Wide Action Plan, with indicators. So every organization has to do two things. First of all, revisit and review all their policies and programs, and if I may use that word, engender them, to be sure that in all of them the gender perspective is included, and not only in an abstract and theoretical way, but also in money allocation, etc. But the other thing is how the UN leads by example. So how they revisit and review their HR policies, human resources policies, to ensure that women have the opportunities to be at the decision-making levels, and that they have a fair and adequate work environment. So, and we are not the gender police, but we are people who are providing policy guidance so we can advance in gender. And this plan is in the process of rollout, and we're going to have soon good results. But at the end, I have to say, in my experience in life, and probably yours, the most important thing is what happens on the field, on the country level, because that's where we're working with the real women and girls, or with the real people. I mean, we at the UN are also real people, but I mean, you know what I mean. It's different. And usually, it depends so much on personalities. It depends so much on somebody who really wants to sort of work by themselves. But it's helping because there is a whole UN process on a mechanism called Delivering as One that is trying to work together as the UN. It's not only on UN Women to produce better results and to be really relevant in people's life. So that's helping because through Delivery as One, through joint programming, through the UNDAF, that is sort of the framework of working in each country, we have been gender mainstreaming, we have been defining concrete budgets, priorities, etc. But we are in the process, so probably a couple of more years, I can tell you, if all of these things work. Until now, it looks fine, but I know that coordination is one of the most difficult tasks, but it's essential, and not only for UN Women. It's important for development, it's important for all different aspects. But coordination is not only inside the UN system. We need to coordinate also with civil society, with women's organization, with human rights organization. So in that case, what I have done is invited a group of sort of 30 women from around the world, and they were chosen by the NGOs. They proposed the names, and I selected like 25 or 30 because more we will have to hire a stadium every time we meet. And they are going to work with us to tell us from their point of view how they see us. Because I believe, like being in government, that it's important that people tells you, because sometimes people, you know, inside believes they're doing fantastic things. But we don't want to lose our direction, and we don't want to lose where we should go. So we're also working with the NGOs so they can tell us, and we are reproducing this model at the regional level and at the country level. And I've given also the instruction that not only, and it should also include women from the grassroots. Because one of the problems that one of the things that concerns me at night sometimes is, are we reaching the women, the more vulnerable one? Or are we reaching only part of it? And how we ensure that our policies reach the ones who need it the most? Even though we have a universal mandate, because women's rights and women's empowerment and gender equality has to be improved all over the world. In terms of which advice and what keep us inspired, I don't know if there is a universal reason to inspire people. I would say what keeps me inspired is the relation with the people on the ground. When I see their needs, but also when I see the results. When you see how a children, girl or boy, a woman or a man, thanks to decisions, with not in a passive and assistentialist way, you are able to improve people's life so they can really develop fully their potential. And what inspires me is people. That is what really inspired me. And that's why sometimes in headquarters, I'm dying to go to the field. Because of course, we people work there, but we need to know what is the meaning of what we're doing. If we are really being meaningful, if we're really being, because otherwise, what would you be here for if it's not to really ensure that people's lives are changed for the better?
I'm Gabriela Guzman. I'm a 15-year-old student from Sydney, and I'd just like to thank you for this amazing experience. And as you can imagine, I'm a growing girl, and I like making things right, and I really believe in gender equality, and I'd just like to thank you for this talk today, and hopefully in the future I can be in your position and doing the amazing things you've done. Thank you.
I'm Lisa Forward. Women in Chile do not receive equal wages with men. Would you consider walking with the women in Santiago next time they march for these rights?
Thank you. Yeah. But I will answer to Gabrielle, that I suppose is Gabriela Guzman, but she's an Australian now. Yeah, it's very important. When I was a Minister of Health, young girls would tell me tia, because in my country they said auntie to the oldest people. To the adults, I would say. Auntie, when I will grow up, I want to be a doctor like you. But afterwards, they will tell me I want to be a president of the Republic. So that's why role models are so important. And let me share with you a fantastic experience, just 2 minutes. Do you know that in Finland, Tarja Halonen was the president of the Republic for 12 years, head of state. And of course, she did many things, but she usually went to different places, and she went to a kindergarten. And she started talking with the children and asking them, what do you want to be when they're growing up? And they was 5 years old, 6 years old children. And she already been in office like for 9 years, sorry. So everyone answered the typical answers. I want to be a teacher, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a lawyer, a doctor, etc. And then she asked to a little boy who was sitting there and very silent, and he said, don't you want to be president of Finland? And his answer was, in Finland, men cannot be president of the Republic. His whole life, he has seen a woman. So that is so important, and I mention it because many times we think how we change mindset, how we change culture. And sometimes visibilizing women in important positions helps so much more than very sophisticated policies. So, I'm very happy that I'm not only inspiring, but aspiring for you to be a future president. And of course, and the other thing, equal pay, yes. According to our constitution, we could not send a law that would establish something like that, because it's supposed the constitution to say that equality. So we couldn't say we couldn't state an affirmative action in salaries for women. We look for all the alternatives. The only thing we could find that is not perfect, but at least it's progress, is that women who do not have the right, do not pay equal job, salary for equal wage for equal salary job, they have support and they can present their case to the justice. And it's not perfect, but it's sort of an incentive for the companies to really reconsider the criteria of equal pay. It was impossible legally. I really looked for all the possible ways, because really for me it's incredible. So it helped, but it was not the perfect solution. So we need to think what else we need to do about that.
So would you march with the women?
Would you march with them? Like as in
Santiago?
the street?
Oh, I have done it many times.
I really want to say how honoured I think we all feel for having been present in the room with you. Your personality and your presence just dominates and inspires us in all that we are all doing to work towards the inequality of women. And I thank you on behalf of all of us for your most impassioned address today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you for your work.